Okay, seems like we're recording. Cool. So this is more like a devlog entry than something I'm trying to explain. But we're basically going through what the plugin actually are doing right now, what are islands, and a little more about what we've achieved in, I don't know, the past 2 months, 3 months of work with this plugin. So to start off with, what are islands? So I do have a write-up that you can go through for the whole thing, but just to simplify, it's a block of interactivity on mostly static HTML. So one of the mainstream frameworks that do this right now is Astro.build, and mostly you would see people going for something like this instead of using the island plugins, but then they're not built for the general consumer and the general developer in the first place. They're built for people who are writing meta frameworks. So to go back to what Astro does is when you're working with something like this and most of it is static, you don't really need JavaScript to get this data or to render this HTML for you. So what Astro does is most of this is rendered, and when you do need interactivity, for example, this, uh, you would have a certain set of JavaScript pushed just for this. Like the browser only requests this amount of JS to be able to work with this. Now, if I was to show an example of this live, I would actually have to create a new project, but was it npm? Well, let's just copy it from here. Yeah, and we're just gonna create a dummy island project to show you what I mean, and then we'll get to how the plugins actually handles the same thing. And we use 18, and that should start in a bit. uh, Dummy islands, just an empty template. Not right now. No. Nope. Cool. So what I have over here is a very simple Astro website, and what we're gonna do so that we can show the interactivity side of things is we're gonna add npx Astro add in Preact. So once this is done, while this is going on, I'm just gonna show as to what would happen if I was using something like this. So bnpmi and bnpx Astro add Preact. So you're just gonna wait for this to happen. But if I was to start this right now, all you would see is this HTML get rendered for you. So what Astro does is it gives you a specific language, or more like a syntax on top of mdoc, which basically allows you to pass down data from your markdown scripting area, or technically your front matter scripting area, to your HTML. So I could basically type in message over here which would say hello world, and then the same thing would be available to you over here during render. So that's done. We'll just add Preact, and while Preact is setting up, I'm just gonna add or start the Astro server. So what you see is it prints hello world. Now if I do inspect this, all you see is HTML. There's no JavaScript. So Astro is just taking in whatever you've given, rendering it on the server, and the requests are handled for you immediately. So there's no JavaScript required. But now let's say I do have a requirement where I need a certain set of interactivity. So you cannot actually directly add interactivity over here right now. What you can do is add in components of different UI libraries. So if you wanted to use, let's say, Svelte, you could add Svelte. Over here, we're just going to add a simple counter, the general counter example. So let's say I add in the counter, I take in state from whatever, and we just basically add the smallest possible interaction that is required. So say +1, that's on click. So what did oh, okay. This is basically coming from Preact and hooks. So once this installs itself, which is going on right now, I should now be able to go into Astro and tell it that it's supposed to load the counter here, and we'll just manually import it now. No idea why that's not working, but component/counter. And what you see over here is I now have the element, but the problem is that it's still static HTML. So if I do want interactivity over here in Astro, what you would do is you would add a client load, which basically tells Astro that as soon as the client loads, this is something I need to load. If there's other modifiers that you can use, there's client active, client idle, client view, so on and so forth. But for the cases, like the simple case of showing what's going on, we're just going to use client load. Now what this does is now instead of a button, you see a web component called Astro Island. And what this is doing is it maintains a few properties with regards to the actual component. So you have the ID of the component, which is a generically generated value based on what's being used as a interactive island. So now this is now an island. And the difference is everything else is still static, but this value is now interactive. So what it's doing is you have a certain set of identifiers to figure out where this component is from, the dependencies that the component has. They also split it into chunks, so you have a renderer for specifically this. It works great. And then you have the client modifiers, which is basically loaded on client, any additional props that I need to pass. So let's say I had data equals to 1 and I saved that and I refreshed, you would see that the props for that is actually passed down. So you get a certain set of props. You have pre-scripts that are required. So these are scripts that almost every island gets. And because Astro works in a way where you can use multiple, what do you say, front-end libraries, you have different hydration scripts that might be required. So this just works and we have this working. Now, why create something again? So there's a slight difference between how Astro does it and how Preact Island does it, or the plugins do it. But there's not much difference in the actual final result that we're trying to achieve, which is being able to send through static HTML and being able to add interactivity to smaller elements. Now there's other things that you could use. You could use Alpine.js, you could use HTMX. There's 100 solutions. So for now, we're just going to go into how you would do this with islands and the differences that this has. So going back to the actual project, let's get done with this. I don't need the project again. But you just need to remember that this is how you would initiate an island in, let's say, Astro. So Preact plugins actually started to be able to do something similar, but we just actually start with a project first. So dget daily human ref nitro, and we'll just create the same folder. So what the islands started as is being able to define random files as islands. So if I was to go in here and just get the dependencies ready, what you would see is I'm just rendering a similar component from counter and the component comes from here. Now, if I do not have interactivity added, so right now the islands have auto detection, so I'll get to that in a bit. But let's just say there's no interactivity to this file. and all I'm doing is rendering the value 1. So when I start this as a dev server, and we go into localhost 3000, you will see that there's no actual interactivity. It's just similar to what Astro is doing. Now, what I wish to do is to be able to tell it at the start or while I'm developing that this is going to be an island in the future. So you could just go ahead and say island.js instead of just island, and then you would start the server again, and you would actually have to save this to be counter.island so it can resolve that file. And what you see is it tries to generate an island for you, but there's no interactivity in here, so there's nothing it can do. Now, the other option that you have over here is basically writing at the read island over here. Once you do that, you will see that there's a certain set of files being generated for you. And once that is done, what you will see is instead of island counter, instead of just the button, you get an island counter. So very similar to what Astro was doing, but we don't really need identifiers because each mapper has its own script location that is sent with it. So this only loads once. Why? Because the browser handles this. There's no dependency on me or the web component to handle this. The browser handles it for me. Similarly, there's no interactivity in here, so it's not going to do much. But this is one of the many ways that you could go forward with this, is where you could define it as an island beforehand. Now, the other option, as I showed, was being able to define it as an island up top, and we'll have to change the routes. Now, why do you have this as a functionality? Is because not always would you wish to go and rename your files. So if I just delete all the islands and I just save this file again, you should technically see the islands folder generated for you again. And what this is doing is it still generates an island, but there's again no interactivity added to it. So this top level comment helps you define a certain exported component to be an island. So you could have other components over here. You could have a container that is basically rendering P with hello world or whatever. But your default export is now considered an island. So if I was to add in a fragment over here and move this back up and refresh over here, you now still have the entire thing inside one of our custom web components. Now, this is one way. What you also can do over here is define if it is supposed to load up immediately or if it is supposed to load up lazily. So if you say that it is supposed to load up lazily by 0.2, this basically means it's going to be loading up 20% into the view. So this basically works as a threshold on how far or how much is the component or the island supposed to be in the view to be able to load itself. So your network request doesn't go for the component unless this is already a part in the view. Right now it's immediate because that's all we have, but this is something that can help you define a lazy point for this component to get rendered or technically hydrated. But this is another set of things that you can do. Now, finally, if I don't want to use any of this and I just don't care about it, the current version of islands can detect if it is actually an island. So, for example, if I just have this and I get rid of the original islands folder, so I have nothing generated over here for me for this because there's no actual interactivity going on over here. There's nothing that this function does that adds behavior to it. It is just sending a button. But what if I wanted to add interactivity to it? So let's say I bring back the state that I was using. So this could be from Preact hooks, that could be signals, you could be using mobx, doesn't really matter. And we get back to adding the counter, which is basically 0, and you show in count, and on click, you basically show set count 1 plus 1. Now, what I want you to see is the moment I save this file, there's a new island generated for you. So plugins can auto detect if something has interactivity and add it for you. Similarly, I could have 100 other things that are running over here. So I could have static components. So I could just have a greeting message. So greeting message.js, which is also exporting something. Message and return h1 hello world. And then we can just go into routes index, go in here, change this to a fragment, save that, refresh, and greeting message is not imported. So that should do that. And you can see this is still static, and this is still an interactive component. And there's no generation for the counter over here anymore. But the moment I add in any kind of functionality over here, this could be as simple as a click handler. So on click, let's say console log something, and we just add this over here to on click, do whatever I have to find as the on click handler, and console log hello. I save this file, and you see the greeting message is being generated. Now there's multiples being generated because every change of content generates one over here. This is basically controlled by our configuration, which defines that it is supposed to hash it. So if I say hash false, it would not be generating the hash values for me. But for now, we're just going to keep the hash open because I'm working on the browser that likes to cache everything. So this generates based on every change. So if I change this to hello world, I would have a new chunk which has that. And now if you see, I have 2 islands instead of 1. And as you can see, they each have their own set of JS required or sourced for itself. And none of them actually have any dependency on the other. Each of them is a separate Preact micro app or micro component. And clicking this should basically console log hello world. I could just keep going. And similarly, go back, get rid of any kind of handler, any kind of interactivity, refresh this is back to static. So this is what was added recently. I added this in version 0.1.2, but it started off with the original intent of .island.js and being able to give a top level comment of @island. Now why build this? Well, as I said, this is more for people working with a meta framework or trying to build a meta framework. If you are someone who wishes to try this, the easiest way to go forward with this is the Pref Nitro integration. So Nitro handles routing for you, handles storage from you. Like, this is all really well done by the UnJS team, and all that I have done with the islands is integrate the ES build configuration for you right here. So it takes care of what do you say, handling the build pipeline that is required for you to work with it. That's basically handled for you in this. But if you're someone who's working on, let's say, a meta framework and you wish to use it with white, the plugins themselves are compatible with white. So the roller plugin is compatible with white, and you can just go forward and use it with that. That's a little more work though. So that's mostly what I wanted to show, and hopefully that impresses someone, but whatever. So if you do wish to have a few projects that are actually using this with styles and everything, I think I built a port of Tom Leonard's site. So that is, I think, yeah, so you can use this as a reference. This is one of the repositories, and the other repositories would be the show off repo that also has, I think, Uno CSS or Tailwind, one of the two. So yeah, it has Uno CSS. So this is with styles, and this is built similarly. There's no actual islands over here. It is just a way to show off the integration with different toolings and Nitro. So That's one. And then you have Tom's website, which is not really hosted anywhere, but this is basically what we built. So this is also something that's basically the same thing that's built with Nitro and Preact instead of the Next.js website that you see over here. So hopefully that convinces someone to check it out. If not, great, whatever. Yeah, I'm not crying. Anyways, so that's about it. Have a good day.